Welcome. We have an exciting presentation today. It's a very large conversation. And we are going to look into the life of Abigail and how she come to be David's wife. But in this story, we're going to look how incredible the women of the Old Testament are, a woman of faith. I hope you enjoy this. We want to jump right in because it is a really, really big story. And we hope and pray that you enjoy it. Want to take a moment to share with you again the small city of Rocks north of Gooding, Idaho. Pretty spectacular place. Thank you, Sherry. Lovely place. What a beautiful day that was. All right, let's get into our story. It is titled Abigail, Nabal, and David. And you can find this story in 1 Samuel 25, verses 2 to 42. Now, notice on your screen it says a Gospel Recovery Series. This is the third in a six-part series. So I hope you enjoy it. Let's begin the story. Abigail marries a very, very successful man in this era. You're going to, just the numbers are going to boggle your mind here in just a moment. But it reads like this. Now there was a man in Maon whose business was in Carmel, and the man was very rich. Pay attention to the numbers. He had 3,000 sheep and 1,000 goats. Now, Abigail's a very lovely woman. Notice how it describes her. Now the man's name was Nabal, and his wife's name was Abigail. The woman was intelligent and beautiful in appearance. Now, the name Nabal means actually fool. Today, you might call him a jerk. I hate to say that, but you'll see what I mean. Notice how the text reads. But the man was harsh and evil in his dealings, and he was a Calebite. Now, David, in verses 4 to 9, we begin, sends his men to collect from Nabal for his protection. What that means is that David has a security company, if you would, and he has about 600 men under his authority here. Now, they go out and they protect people like Nabal so that the rustlers won't steal their animals. So David sends his men to collect from Nabal after a year of protecting his herds. This was customary due to the criminal activity in the area. It reads this way. So David sent 10 young men, and David said to the young men, "Go up to Carmel, visit Nabal, and greet him in my name, and thus you shall say, 'Have a long life. Peace be to you, and peace be to your house, and peace be to all that you have. Now I have heard that you have shearers. Now your sheep have been with us, and we have not insulted them, nor have they missed anything all the days they were in Carmel.'" Now, pay attention here that his security company has kept the wealthy man's herds from any harm. "Ask your young men, and they will tell you. Therefore, let my young men find favor in your eyes, for we have come on a festive day. Please give whatever you find at hand to your servants and to your son David." So consider this a free will invitation to give from your heart, Nabal. In verse 9 it reads, "When David's young men came, they spoke to Nabal according to all these words in David's name. Then they waited." Now, remember Nabal, his name is Fool. Nabal's predictable and proves his name to be correct. Now, the name Fool could also mean a rageaholic and put his entire estate and family in peril. But Nabal answered David's servants and said, "Who is David? Who is the son of Jesse? There are many servants today who are each breaking away from their master. Shall I then take my bread, my water, and my meat that I have slaughtered from my shears and give it to men whose origin I don't know?" In other words, he is refusing the traditional gift to those who have protected his animals. So David's young men told him according to all these words, and David said to his men, now pay attention, each of you gird on your sword. In other words, they went without swords to ask for this offering. So each man put on his sword, and David also girded on his sword, and about 400 men went up behind David, while 200 stayed with the baggage. Now, pay attention here, because in every dysfunctional family, someone always knows what's going on. They know who to tell to fix things. This is true in this story as well. Here it is. But one of the young men, that was who had witnessed David's men asking for the offering, told Abigail, Nabal's wife, saying, behold, David sent messengers from the wilderness to greet our master, and he scorned them. Yet the men were very good to us, and we were not insulted, nor did we miss anything as long as we went about with them while we were in the fields. They were a wall to us both by night and by day. All the time we were with them tending the sheep. Now, therefore, know and consider what you should do, for evil is plotted against our master and against all his household, and he is such a worthless man. That's what it says, and no one can speak to him. You know, I'm sorry, that happens to be in the Bible, and it really plays out in this story to be true. To save the day, Abigail works alone. She is a woman of faith, and women of faith in the Old Testament were extraordinary women. Sometimes a picture gets painted of these women as just subservient. Do not believe that is true, especially after this story. Abigail is going to intercede. Pay attention. Then Abigail hurried and took 200 loaves of bread, 2 jugs. Now those jugs probably would have been 5-gallon clay jugs of the day, 2 jugs of wine, 5 sheep already prepared. That means they were probably barbecued. 5 measures of roasted grain, 100 clusters of raisins, and 200 cakes of figs, and loaded them on donkeys. Now, let me tell you, I mean, this woman is extraordinary. Abigail knows when to practice the don't talk rule. You'll learn more about that in our next 3 presentations. She said to her young men, go on before me. Behold, I am coming after you. But she did not tell her husband Nabal. Now, to save the day, note Abigail works alone. By faith, she will stop 400 men in their tracks who mean to do serious harm to her home. Now, that is a challenge. Notice how this comes about. It came about as she was riding on her donkey and coming down by the hidden part of the mountain, that behold, David and his men were coming up toward her. So she met them. Now, David had said, surely in vain I have guarded all that this man has in the wilderness, so that nothing was missed in all that belonged to him. And he has returned me evil for good. Are you getting a sense of what's coming here? Are you noticing that David is armed, 400 men? So apparently, if you refuse the kindness of the protection, there were expected consequences. Otherwise, Abigail would not have known exactly what she needed to do. So we're looking at a cultural story here, but we are looking at an extraordinary woman in a very, very difficult circumstance. She intercedes. May God do so to the enemies of David, and more also, if by morning I leave as much as one male of any who belong to him. So David just tells her that he is going to actually kill every single male in her entire household. Now, with 4,000 animals, do you understand the predicament she would be in? In verse 23, when Abigail saw David, she hurried and dismounted from her donkey and fell on her face before David and bowed herself to the ground. In other words, her forehead is touching the ground. Culturally, that would be the appropriate description of what this woman is doing. Here she is, 400 men coming up the road, and she is in the middle of that road, forehead on the ground, with just her donkey behind her. It's a pretty intense story, isn't it? How far would you be willing to go to save your household? I just have to say that this woman is admirable. I also want to point out something else, that Abigail is assuming Nabal's responsibility. Pay attention to this. Nabal should have, out of courtesy, just given those guys a meal when they came up. And now this woman, single-handedly, is going to step in and take care of what Nabal the fool has refused to do. Now, I told you she was an extraordinary person, an extraordinary woman. And now you're beginning to see the level of intensity that this story unfolds. Now, I want you to pay attention to what takes place in the story, because she begs for Nabal's life, for he is, as his name, a fool. You're going to see that's exactly what Scripture says here in just a moment. Continuing the verse, she fell at his feet and said, "On me alone, my Lord, be the blame." Now, wait a minute. Was she the blame? No, she's assuming all responsibility here. Pay careful attention. It continues. "And please let your maidservant speak to you and listen to the words of your maidservant. Please do not let my Lord pay attention to this worthless man." Second time we heard this description, isn't it? "Nabal, for as his name is, so is he. Nabal is his name, and folly is with him. But I, your maidservant, did not see the young men of my Lord whom you sent." Now, notice how much responsibility she is assuming on herself. She's taking full responsibility, way beyond what is appropriate. You could say this is a codependent moment for Abigail, but she is willing to do this to save her entire household. In verse 26, the story continues. "Now, therefore, my Lord, as the Lord lives, and as your soul lives, since the Lord has restrained you from shedding blood and from avenging yourself by your own hand, now then, let your enemies and those who seek evil against my Lord be as Nabal, fools." Verse 27. "Now let this gift which your maidservant has brought to my Lord be given to the young men who accompany my Lord." 400 men are behind David, armed and ready for justice. Isn't this an extraordinary story? Old Testament women are remarkable. It is worth the time to go back and read carefully these stories. You don't get this sense that these women are somehow subservient women. Notice in verse 28, Please forgive the transgression of your maidservant. For the Lord will certainly make for my Lord an enduring house, because my Lord is fighting the battles of the Lord, and evil will not be found in you all your days. Should anyone rise up to pursue you and seek your life, then the life of my Lord shall be bound in the bundle of the living with the Lord your God. She's really good at this, isn't she? In verse 34, nevertheless, as the Lord God of Israel lives, who has restrained me from harming you, unless you had come quickly to meet me, David says, surely there would not have been left to Nabal until the morning light as much as one man, one male. Did you catch what David just said? Your intervention has saved your entire household. So David received from her hand what she had brought him, and said to her, go up to your house in peace. See, I have listened to you, and I have granted your request. Consider the predicament that Nabal, who is a raging, angry, selfish man, has brought on his house. But I want you to meet Abigail, this woman of faith, a highly intelligent woman who has prepared with her staff the ability to go out and feed 400 men and intervene and save her entire household. And may I say with kindness, but I don't want you to miss the point that she assumed full responsibility for the craziness of her husband Nabal. It should have been Nabal who was out there doing this. But Abigail has saved the day. I cannot stress the importance of that in this story. Abigail's conversation could only happen after Nabal sobered up. Now, I want to say this is true. I'm just going to say that if you have a friend or family members who are alcoholics or are intoxicated, if you're trying to talk to them, good luck. It just doesn't work. But I'm going to tell you, if they're a rageaholic, you can't talk to them either. You have to wait until it is safe. It's only safe the next day or the next week, depending on the situation. And that is what this woman now is faced with in reality. How do I tell this crazy man what just about happened to his entire household? In verse 36, then Abigail came to Nabal, and behold, he was holding a feast in his house, like the feast of a king. And Nabal's heart was merry within him, for he was very drunk. So she did not tell him anything at all until the morning light. Now, verse 37 is so important to us. But in the morning, when the wine had gone out of Nabal, his wife told him these things. Pay attention now. And his heart died within him, so that he became as a stone. Now, there's some interesting medical terminology here. First of all, if he became like a stone, he is paralyzed. And if his heart died, there's a reason that he can't move. When you have paralysis, normally someone has experienced something medically, we would probably call that a stroke. Notice verse 38. About 10 days later, the Lord struck Nabal and he died. Now, there are some medical people who will tell you that Nabal clearly had a stroke because he went into paralysis, he couldn't move, and then he died. Apparently, a blood clot somehow in the brain or in the lungs, somewhere in this, had caused this stroke to happen. It's a sad story, isn't it? But Can you understand the anxiety and stress that Nabal was under when he understood 400 armed men were coming to actually wipe out his household? All the men in it? It's a sad story in that sense. But now the story takes an unusual twist. David was attracted to this powerful woman, and he's going to take her as his wife. I mean, she has left an impression on him that is stunning. Let's go back to the story. When David heard that Nabal was dead, he said, "Blessed be the name of the Lord, who has pleaded the cause of my reproach from the hand of Nabal, and has kept back his servant from evil." That would be David killing off everyone in his household. "The Lord has also returned the evil doing of Nabal on his own head." Then David sent a proposal to Abigail to take him as his wife. Things were done a little different in these days. But can you just pause for a moment here and look at who it is that David is asking to be his wife? 4,000 head of livestock involved in this story. It's no ordinary story. This remarkable woman able to run this household has left a profound impression on David as an extraordinary human being. You can understand his attraction. It says, when the servants of David came to Abigail at Carmel, they spoke to her, saying, David has sent us to you to take you as his wife. Now she arose and bowed with her face to the ground and said, Behold, your maidservant is a maid to wash the feet of my Lord's servants. Then Abigail quickly arose and rode on a donkey with her 5 maidens who attended her. She followed the messengers of David and became his wife. That brings us to the end of the story, but not the end of our conversation. I want to walk through these points carefully with you. Point number 1 in this story. Abigail was a very powerful person in her own right. I mean, look at the man she chose to marry in Nabal. Look at the man she chose to marry in David. Both very strong-willed men, very successful in their own right. She stopped David in his tracks. She did save her entire household by assuming responsibility, may I say, that was not hers, but a courageous woman nonetheless. Point number 2 in this story, and this is really, really important. Abigail changed partners. Nabal for David. But her life was still, in many ways, the same. Now just think about that for a moment. Changing partners, but her life was still the same in many ways. David offered her these things: kindness, protection, privilege eventually when he became king, security. And no doubt he was infatuated with her. Can I say he loved her? That is not included in the story. But I would have to believe that he did, in many ways, love her deeply. But she found herself in another challenging relationship. When we talk about attraction in relationships, I want to point out that this thing called codependency plays a significant role. Did Abigail see an opportunity to rescue a man like David before he became king? What attracted her to David? And David, like I said, in many ways is going to repeat much of Nabal's character, but without the rage, without the anger. So, these points. David wasn't the ideal husband. He could not offer her closeness or even true intimacy. He could only love her conditionally, because David eventually had 8 wives. We need in this story to learn to take responsibility for our own actions and behavior. We cannot assume responsibility for others without enabling them to continue in their problems. Living by faith, notice God still walks with us through our failures, offering his grace, unconditional love, and forgiveness. And God's redemption is healing and life-changing when we're willing to accept it. And all of these things are playing out by faith in the story of Abigail and in David's life in many ways. Even though we stand on the outside and look in and say, these aren't ideal situations, God is still in their midst. And don't miss that point of this story. It's a profoundly important story. I want to go to our closing picture. This is just one of those spectacular scenes in southern Idaho, just that huge open prairie. You're just coming into the bottom of the mountains there, and that's part of one of the great national parks there. And notice the colors. This is October, beautiful blue sky. Thank you, Sherry, for bringing us that picture. Stop and think about how much responsibility you take for yourself and how much responsibility you take for others as you walk in a life by faith. I hope you're blessed today with this story. It's a rich, full story. Go back, read it again carefully. Blessings now. Take care.